There are two ways a player responds when the football world decides it has seen enough to write a verdict. The first way is to go quiet. To absorb the criticism, manage the pain privately, perform humility publicly, and wait for someone else's narrative to eventually be replaced by your own. Most players choose this path. It is the safer one. It generates fewer headlines in the short term. It reduces the surface area for attack. The second way is to keep talking. Not defensively, not the panicked, emotional, I'll-show-you-all response of a player who cannot process pressure without externalizing it. But in the specific, measured, spiritually grounded way of a person who has been through enough to understand that silence is not always humility and that the story being written about you is not the only story available. That there is a version of yourself, the real version, the one built from 9 years of your father's coaching and 24 years of preparation and a 3.9 GPA and 37 college touchdowns and the specific competitive resilience that carries you through 5 consecutive years of hell without breaking, that version deserves to be heard too. Shedeur Sanders keeps talking. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Through cryptic Instagram stories and defiant X posts and press conference answers that land harder than they look because the words are always precisely chosen and the calm underneath them is always completely real. And in the past 6 weeks, as the Watson inside track narrative hardened and the third-string murmurs started circulating and the ESPN voices raised their concerns and the analytical community debated whether his second-year future in Cleveland was even secure, he has been firing back in the only way that a person with his specific psychology fires back. He keeps showing the world who he is. Keeps choosing how the story gets told. Keeps saying, in every available format and through every available action, the same essential message. I am still that guy. Tonight we go through every piece of it, every message, every post, every press conference answer, every Pro Bowl moment, every OTA session, every single demonstration that the player the critics have been trying to bury for 14 months is not only still present but building toward the version of himself that makes every verdict written about him premature. Subscribe right now. This is the full firing back. Let's go. The specific trigger for the most recent round of the firing back was a moment in May when everything the critics had been saying about the quarterback competition seemed to crystallize at once. The Watson minicamp edge report. The Shiloh sandwich controversy. The ESPN insider voices raising questions about whether Sanders could even hold the number 2 job against Gabriel. The training camp circus warnings. The anonymous GM saying you know where this is coming from. The Bleacher Report 5-12 projection. All of it hitting at the same time, from multiple directions, in the specific compressed way that media narratives concentrate when they find a direction and run with it. And then on May 8, Shedeur Sanders posted something to his Instagram story. On Friday, Shedeur Sanders shared a cryptic message on his Instagram story. The message encouraged people to focus on God instead of others' opinions. Think about a person's opinion, the text read. CBS Sports. Think about a person's opinion. That is the complete message. 5 words on an Instagram story, shared on a Friday morning while the Cleveland Browns QB situation was generating national coverage from every available angle. Not a press conference rebuttal. Not a direct response to any specific critic or any specific report. 5 words that ask the reader to do something, to actually think, not just absorb, before accepting whatever the latest opinion about the person sharing the post might be. The specific instruction to think rather than simply receive is the most revealing piece of the message. Because the critics who have been loudest about Shedeur Sanders, the ones who cite the second worst QBR since 2006, who point to the 10 interceptions, who warn about third-string positioning and training camp circuses and the Watson edge, those critics are presenting information as verdict. They are taking statistics and reports and competition dynamics and translating them directly into conclusions without examining the underlying context that makes those conclusions less settled than they appear. Think about a person's opinion. Think about where it comes from. Think about what information it is based on. Think about whether the person offering it has the full picture. Think about the 40% pressure rate that nobody in the QBR conversation puts next to the number. Think about the rebuilt offensive line that did not exist when those statistics were produced. Think about the growth from start 1 to start 7 that Barry specifically cited. Think before you accept the verdict as final. That is the firing back. Not emotional. Not defensive. An invitation to intellectual engagement with a narrative that has been running on autopilot for over a year. Sanders posted a message about dealing with outside noise and whose opinions are truly important. Learn to value the opinions of those who care about you, not the noise from everyone else, Sanders wrote on ESPN. The March post. 2 months before the May Instagram story. The same philosophical operating principle delivered in a different format at a different moment in the competitive pressure cycle. Learn to value the right opinions. Not the popular ones. Not the loudest ones. Not the ones delivered with the most authority or the most credential or the most institutional backing. The ones from people who actually care about your growth rather than your failure. This distinction between the people who care about you and the noise from everyone else is the specific filter that has allowed Shedeur Sanders to exist in the most noise-saturated quarterback evaluation environment in professional football without the noise producing the outcomes the noise was designed to produce. The anonymous sources who said worst formal interview ever, not someone who cares about you. The ESPN voices raising concerns about third-string positioning, not someone who cares about you in the developmental sense, though some are doing honest journalism. The training camp circus warning, not someone who cares about you. The statistical analysis citing second worst QBR, not someone whose opinion you are asked to ignore, but someone whose opinion you weigh against the full context of what they are describing. The people who care about you, Todd Monken, who said elite playmaking ability. Andrew Berry, who said growth from start 1 to start 7. Bernie Kosar, who said do not rush him, do not dissipate his confidence, he certainly made plays. The teammates who Dion specifically cited when he said the locker room believes in Shedeur. The coaches in the building who see the daily work, the morning arrivals, the after-practice film sessions that nobody photographs. Those voices. Learn to value those. Not to ignore the others. A competitive professional needs to hear criticism and process it honestly. But to weight the right voices most heavily. And the right voices, by the evidence of this offseason, are saying something different from the narrative the loudest voices are constructing. After Bleacher Report framed his earlier post as Sanders taking a shot at critics, the quarterback responded by offering his own context. You able to see the lies clearly? I only give my perspective publicly to help others that may struggle with things that this society thrives off of, Sanders wrote in his response. Sharp football analysis. You able to see the lies clearly? That is the specific phrase that separates the Shedeur Sanders public response from generic athlete positivity content. He is not saying to ignore the criticism because it is irrelevant. He is saying to see it clearly, to see both the valid parts and the fabricated parts with equal clarity and to respond to each appropriately. The lies are the lies. The valid criticism is the valid criticism. You can hold both simultaneously if you are looking clearly rather than through the defensive fog of a player who cannot process critique. Society thrives off of. That is the specific cultural observation embedded in the message that the ecosystem around young athletes, young black athletes specifically, young athletes from famous families specifically, is structured in ways that reward negative narratives, that manufacture controversy from ordinary human behavior. That turns the specific combination of confidence and competition and public profile into a liability rather than an asset. The headphone story. The draft fall framing. The entitled narrative. The casino of anonymous source reporting that hit Shedeur from every direction before he threw a single professional pass. Society thrives off those stories. They generate engagement. They produce the specific emotional response in audiences that media ecosystems are built to capture. His public perspective is not for his own validation. He said it himself, it is to help others who may struggle with the same things. The player who has been through the most heavily documented version of being narratively demolished before being given a genuine chance to prove himself is saying, this thing that happened to me, this social media assassination campaign dressed up as NFL evaluation reporting, this happens to other people too. Maybe not as visibly. Maybe not with a Hall of Fame father to call the lies out publicly. But the mechanism is familiar. And if my willingness to speak about it helps someone else process their own version of it, then the public perspective is worth giving. That is not an athlete managing his brand. That is a human being making meaning out of the hardest year of his professional life in a way that extends its value beyond his own story. The Pro Bowl moment is where the family's collective firing back reached its most public and most emotionally charged expression. Because the Pro Bowl selection, improbable, circumstantial, produced by the specific replacement chain that begins with Drake May going to the Super Bowl, was received by the critics as one final piece of evidence that the system around Shedeur Sanders was inflated. That the pedigree and the narrative could produce a Pro Bowl selection even from a quarterback with the second worst QBR since 2006. Deion Sanders Jr. shared a clip from the Boondocks featuring thugnificent questioning where all the hostility originates. "It's a beautiful thing seeing how much pleasure they get from hating on my bloodline," Deion Jr. wrote. "Dogs by nature. Pleasure from hating on my bloodline." That is the Sanders family's collective read on the specific energy directed at them across the entire 2-year period from the draft through the Pro Bowl selection. Not legitimate criticism that engages honestly with the football evidence. Pleasure. The specific, personal, emotionally motivated enjoyment that some segment of the audience takes from watching this family be diminished in public forums. And Deion Jr., who is not the player at the center of it, who is watching from the outside as his brother absorbs everything, named it directly. The pleasure is not confusion about his brother's ability. It is the specific energy of people who wanted the story to go a different way and are working actively to ensure that every piece of available information gets framed in the direction of the outcome they prefer. Shedeur himself did not respond to the Pro Bowl backlash with similar directness. He participated. He played the flag football game. He threw passes under the lights in San Francisco during Super Bowl 60 week as an AFC Pro Bowl quarterback replacing Drake May. He wore number 2. He was there because football put him there, and he was going to be present for it fully regardless of how the criticism, the firing back was the presence itself. The refusal to be shamed away from the opportunity. The specific act of showing up to the Pro Bowl as though he belonged there, because by the rules of the event, he did, while the noise about whether his presence was deserved ran its course around him. The OTA evidence is the most important and the least dramatic piece of the firing back. Because the specific, competitive, football-producing work that happens on the practice field in May is not the stuff of cryptic Instagram stories or defiant X posts. It is reps, routes. Decision-making under simulated pressure. The daily accumulation of evidence that either confirms or challenges the direction the narrative is pointing. Sanders has pretty much said all the right things to the media and made a strong impression on his teammates. It has allowed him to remain in the mix to become the Browns' starting quarterback despite some metrics that show he had one of the worst seasons in recent history. ESPN. Made a strong impression on his teammates. That is the evaluation that matters most, not the national media, not the ESPN voices, not the statistical analysts with their QBR rankings. The people who share a locker room, who see the work every day, who have no organizational or political reason to be generous or harsh in their assessment of a quarterback's ability and preparation. The teammates who know. And by the account of every credible insider who has reported on the internal culture of the Cleveland Browns' 2026 offseason program, Shedeur Sanders has made a strong impression on those people. Shedeur is clearly aware of the narratives surrounding him right now. While some view him as a backup quarterback, others have already pushed him down the depth chart as a third stringer. Amid all the outside noise, Sanders shared a cryptic message earlier this week addressing public opinions. Sharp football analysis. Clearly aware. The phrase that tells you the firing back is not performed ignorance of the situation. He knows where the Watson narrative is going. He knows what the ESPN third-string projection said. He knows that the competition has early signal indicators pointing in a direction he does not prefer. He is aware of all of it. And the specific way he is responding to being aware, the Instagram stories, the X posts, the press conference composure, the OTA work, the daily presence in the building before others arrive and after others leave, that response is the clearest possible evidence of who he is as a competitor. A player who is rattled by competition does not post about God's opinion and the noise from everyone else. A rattled player either goes too quiet, disappearing into the uncertainty of not knowing how this ends, or goes too loud, the social media performance of confidence that reads as compensating for the absence of the real thing. Shedeur does neither. He operates from the specific psychological center of a person who has survived worse than this and come out the other side more certain rather than less. The bulletproof declaration was not a prediction about the outcome of the competition. It was a description of the psychological state that the competition, regardless of outcome, cannot penetrate. The critics can say what they want. Watson can take the first team reps, the depth chart can say number 2 or number 3 or even number 4 if the organizational politics demand it. None of it changes what is happening on the practice field, where the player wearing number 2 keeps showing up, keeps impressing his teammates, keeps learning Monken's system, keeps building the daily evidence that the verdict being written about him is premature. Kevin Clark's endorsement of Shedeur as the 2026 starting quarterback arrived on ESPN as the most credible national football voice to make the case directly. Not a fan. Not a sentiment-driven assessment. A football analyst who watched the evidence and reached a conclusion that he was willing to state publicly on a major platform. Kevin Clark said on ESPN, he should be the starting quarterback for the Browns in 2026. He detailed why Shedeur Sanders should be QB1 for Cleveland. Bleacher Report. He should be starting. From ESPN itself, the same platform where Jake Trotter raised the training camp circus concern and Tony Grossi offered the third-string projection. The same network. Different analyst. Different conclusion. Because the evidence is genuinely contested, not everyone who watches it carefully reaches the same verdict. And the people who watch it most carefully, with the least organizational politics shaping their view, keep finding reasons to believe that the player who went 3-4 in his 7 starts under the worst possible conditions has something real enough that a full season in better conditions should be allowed to show it. The firing back is working. Not by changing the Watson inside track dynamic overnight. Not by winning the competition through social media rather than practice field performance. But by ensuring that the narrative about Shedeur Sanders is not the only available narrative about Shedeur Sanders. That every time the critics deliver a verdict, there is a countervailing voice, from Kevin Clark at ESPN, from Bernie Kosar the franchise legend, from the teammates who made the strong impression observation, from the head coach who called the playmaking ability elite, from the general manager who said growth from start 1 to start 7, from Deion Jr. calling it the pleasure from hating on his bloodline that keeps the question genuinely open. He is still that guy. The guy who completed 74% of his passes in college. The guy who went 3-4 in 7 starts under conditions that should have produced worse. The guy with the 3.9 GPA and the 9-year coaching relationship with a Hall of Famer and the specific psychological armor that the hardest year of his professional life built rather than destroyed. The guy who calls himself bulletproof not as performance but as description. The guy who tells the media to think about a person's opinion rather than simply receiving it. The critics have been writing the verdict for 14 months. The player whose verdict they are writing keeps showing up and making it harder to finalize. The competition is real. The Watson edge is real. The organizational complexity is real. And Shedeur Sanders, who knows all of it, who is clearly aware of all of it, who processed all of it through Instagram stories and X posts and OTA practice sessions and every available form of the daily professional life that the critics are watching for signs of the collapse they keep predicting, is still there. Still working. Still talking. Still wearing number 2. Still that guy. Warning disclaimer, this video is for entertainment and discussion purposes only. All quotes and information are sourced from Essential Esports, Yardbarker, Browns Nation, College Sports Network, Irish Star, ESPN, Enscape, and other credible NFL media outlets.